Christian Horner is back in the headlines, and this only a few weeks after his definitive departure from Red Bull. The Briton, who shaped the team for 2 decades and during this time secured 8 drivers' titles, as well as 6 constructors' titles, faces a possible comeback in the Formula One paddock after his dismissal in the summer of 2025. But the road back to the pit wall is anything but clear, and a special contractual clause involving Adrian Newey could significantly limit his options. One thing is certain, Horner has reached a severance agreement with Red Bull after long negotiations. According to estimates, he will receive around £80 million, although he voluntarily waived part of the sum to shorten his gardening leave. Instead of remaining on ice until 2027, he may now actively work in Formula One again as early as spring 2026. A deliberate move that shows how much Horner is pushing for a quick return after his demotion at Red Bull. But the question is, where will he find a suitable project? The rumor mill is bubbling. Haas is considered one of the possible candidates. The US team, which has been fighting for sporting survival for years, would be predestined for a manager with Horner's experience. Additionally, insiders suggested that Horner doesn't want a return just as team principal, but also wants to acquire shares, a signal that he wants long-term influence on the strategic direction. But whether Gene Haas, who despite numerous rumors has so far held onto the team, would actually be willing to enter into such a deal remains questionable. Another trail leads to Alpine. Here, Horner's close relationship with Flavio Briatore could play a key role. Briatore has long been pulling strings behind the scenes at Renault again, and Horner is considered one of the few managers in the paddock who works with him confidentially. Renault itself has only recently emphasized that it continues to stand fully behind the Formula One project. However, should the 2026 results disappoint again, the doors for external investors could open. Horner would be a logical candidate in such a constellation to make the struggling team competitive again. But perhaps the most exciting scenario concerns Aston Martin. On paper, it seems like a perfect combination. An ambitious team with enormous financial backing from Lawrence Stroll, plus the ambition to finally enter the title fight. Horner brings the track record, network, and experience to give Aston Martin the decisive push. However, reports are circulating about a special clause in Adrian Newey's contract that could complicate exactly this scenario. Newey, who also left Red Bull in summer 2025 and whose future is hotly discussed in the paddock, is said to have a non-compete clause that blocks direct collaboration with Horner within a certain time frame. The background is the close connection between the two in recent years. Many of Red Bull's title wins were not only the result of Newey's revolutionary designs, but also of Horner's leadership strength. A joint move to a competitor could radically shift the balance of power in Formula One, exactly what Red Bull apparently wanted to prevent. This makes it clear, even if Aston Martin were interested in hiring Horner, the Newey clause could torpedo the venture. And without Newey in tow, Horner loses part of his strategic appeal for many investors. What remains is a mixture full of uncertainty. Horner himself has so far remained silent about his concrete plans, but the fact that he waived millions to be able to get back into business faster speaks volumes. He wants to return, and with power. While Christian Horner's return to Formula One seems like an inevitable chapter, one must not underestimate the resistance he will encounter in the paddock. His departure from Red Bull was not only the end of an era, but was also accompanied by scandals that damaged his image. Even though he can boast an impressive sporting record, many in the paddock ask themselves, do we really want to bring the controversial Briton into the house? Haas would be a logical candidate from a sporting perspective. The team has been languishing in the back of the midfield for years and struggles with a chronic resource and leadership problem. Horner could play to his strengths here, building clear structures, acquiring new sponsors, and the ability to transform a mediocre project into a serious competitor. But there's one decisive obstacle: the lack of budget. Even with Horner's network and negotiating skills, it remains questionable whether Haas could make the jump to the leading group. For Horner, who always fought for wins and titles, it would perhaps be too small a step. The Alpine option appears more interesting. Renault is a manufacturer with tradition and resources, but the results in recent years have been disappointing. Briatore's return in an advisory role shows that they are willing to take drastic measures. Horner could take over operational leadership while Briatore pulls the strategic strings in the background. But here too applies. Without massive financial and technical impetus, it will be difficult to attack Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, or Mercedes. Moreover, the question arises of how two such dominant personalities as Briatore and Horner could work together long-term. But what electrifies most is still the prospect of Aston Martin. Lawrence Stroll has pumped billions into the project, built an ultra-modern factory in Silverstone, and signed Fernando Alonso, a driver who, despite his age, still performs at the highest level. But the results remained below expectations. Here, Horner could be the decisive factor to finally turn big money into consistency and success. His know-how in dealing with sponsors, his ability to rally a team for title hunting, and his political skill in the complicated power structures of Formula One would be exactly what Aston Martin lacks. But the Newey clause is a stumbling block that cannot be ignored. Aston Martin doesn't just want a manager, but also a technical visionary. Without Newey, Horner's package could lose attractiveness. And even if it were possible to overcome the legal hurdles, the question arises, would Red Bull accept it passively if two of their most important figures of the last 20 years suddenly reappeared at their direct rival? Such a step could trigger a legal war that would shake the entire paddock. Besides the sporting options, the political level also plays a role. Formula One has become increasingly a shark tank in recent years where power struggles behind the scenes are just as decisive as lap times on track. Horner was always a master at forging alliances, building pressure, and interpreting rules in his favor. Exactly these qualities make him so interesting for many investors. At the same time, however, some teams fear that his return could further destabilize the already fragile balance in the paddock. Time is ticking. 2026 marks a radical regulatory upheaval. New engine generation, active aerodynamic package, changed energy usage. Anyone who doesn't have the right leadership structure by then risks chasing for years. For Horner, this could be exactly the entry ticket. He has the experience to master such upheavals, as he already proved in 2009 with Red Bull. At that time, the team used the new aerodynamic era to leap from the midfield to the top. The risk is clear. If a team takes Horner, it must also accept his baggage, the causos, the controversies, the enemies in the paddock, the legal pitfalls. But the opportunity is equally obvious. With Horner, one could bring aboard one of the most successful and influential team principals of the last 20 years, a man who guarantees titles, striking power, and media interest. Conclusion: Christian Horner will very likely reappear on the scene in 2026. Whether with Haas, Alpine, or Aston Martin, or perhaps with a completely new investor group, remains open. But one thing is certain: his return will reorder the balance of power in Formula One. For some, this is a threat. For others, a unique opportunity.